Okay, and here we go. We're talking about parasitic insects. It was lice on Wednesday. Here it's fleas and flies. Fleas are in the insect class Siphonaptera. They're all wingless. They presumably evolved from ancestors with wings. The details are a little hard to trace because they don't have a good fossil record at all. There's only a couple of fossil fleas. 75% of all species parasitize mammals, most of those rodents. 6% parasitize birds, and there's even a few reptile fleas. I do not know much about them, whether anybody's ever likely to encounter them, but there are apparently reptile fleas. And they're famous for their jumping abilities. Cat fleas, if you've seen a cat flea, you know that it's less than a millimeter high, but from a standing start, they can jump 33 centimeters high. That's a third of a meter, roughly a foot. So what's that work out to? A flea can jump over 300 times its own height. They build up power because their leg joints contain an extremely elastic, rubbery protein called resolin. So a flea essentially cocks itself, storing energy in wedges of resolin in its joints. And then when it leaps, it releases all of that stored energy. Like slowly compressing a spring and then rapidly releasing it. Resolin, by the way, is also found in not all winged insects, but in the ones that can flap their wings the fastest. Resolin actually forms part of the wing hinge and is part of the secret for how they can beat their wings so rapidly. Insects in a group called the Neoptera, which includes flies and mosquitoes, as well as bees and wasps, can beat their wings much faster than their wing muscles can beat. I probably shouldn't say too much about this, but if you remember, there's a limit to how many action potentials you can send down a nerve. Which means that if your muscles contract every time a nerve fires, there's a limit to how often they can contract. And it's a much lower limit than the wing beat frequency of mosquitoes, which might be several thousand times a second. Part of the way they get around that is using resolin hinges to store and release power for extremely rapid wing beats. So mosquitoes making that high-pitched noise as they fly into your ear, that's ultimately due to resolin. That's caused by that extremely high-frequency wing beat. In fleas, it's the secret of how they can jump so high. The mouth parts are modified to saw into the skin and suck blood. And most fleas are ectoparasites. Certainly dog fleas and cat fleas are. But I'll show you one that's an endoparasite because it burrows into its host. That's the stages of a typical flea life cycle. The eggs, which are not shown at the top, they're shown second from the top, fall off a mammalian host and hatch into a larva that looks like a tiny worm. These just feed on detritus, flecks of dust or whatever is lurking in your carpet. They'll form pupae and then emerge as adults. So those are the stages for the dog flea, Cephalides canis. This is one that you've certainly seen if you've had a dog. Note that this one needs to be controlled, not just because it makes your dog itchy and miserable. It's the intermediate host for the dog tapeworm, Dipylidium canis. Your dog gets the tapeworm by swallowing fleas, right? You've seen dogs trying to bite themselves to get rid of an itch. If they swallow a flea when doing that, they are prone to getting infected by Dipylidium tapeworms. So more than one reason to control your dog's fleas if you can. There's the head of a flea. The adults have an extension of the pharynx called the epipharynx. Looks like a little straw. It's not easy to see. It's the most slender thing shown in the diagram. The epipharynx is surrounded by a pair of labial palps. A palp, by the way, is zoology talk for flap-like thing. So the epipharynx, together with the labial palps, create a food canal that blood is sucked up. Surrounding the epipharynx and the labial palps is a pair of sawtoothed appendages called the laciniae, and that's what actually cuts into the skin of the host. So the laciniae will cut the skin, the saliva of the flea enters, and blood passes through saliva enters through the tube made by the laciniae, and then blood goes up the epipharynx. And again, I assume the saliva contains an anticoagulant to keep it from clotting right in the flea's mouth. And aside from difficulties that fleas cause, itching and things like that, they can certainly bite people as well as dogs and cats. My dad was, for some reason, very attractive to fleas. When I was growing up, we had dogs, and as dogs do, they sometimes got fleas, and they tended to bite my dad. And that's a problem not just because of the itch, but because fleas can transmit bacterial disease. Here's a couple of people back in medieval times suffering from the Black Plague. You can see that their skin is covered with these horrible swellings of infected lymph glands. They're called buboes. The Black Plague wiped out an estimated third of the population of Europe. In some parts of Europe, it was even higher. Norway, if memory serves, 2/3 of the population died of this. And the causative agent is right here. That's Xenopsilla chiopus, the rat flea. Now, if you go searching on the internet, you'll find the statement that the Black Plague was caused by some stupid, bigoted Roman Catholic Pope who declared cats to be satanic. And so Europeans killed all of their cats, and then the rat population exploded, and then the rat flea population exploded, and they spread the Black Plague to humans. You'll see that, but it's actually not true. That's just one of the rumors that circulates. But as far as I know, the Roman Catholic Church never declared cats to be satanic. And rats have been found everywhere you have lots of people, but it wasn't the loss of cats that caused a boom in the rat population. So, like they always say, don't believe everything you read on the internet. I found out that Abraham Lincoln said that on the internet. Right, never mind. You do get some endoparasitic fleas, and this is a particularly nasty one, not present in the continental US as far as I'm aware, but you can get it in the Caribbean. This is the Chigo flea, Tunga penetrans. There you've got a male and a female. They feed on human blood, and after feeding, the females will burrow into human skin, leaving only their anus, genitalia, and a couple of air holes sticking out. Males then mate with that should say mate, not maid. Males mate with the females, and then the males die, and the females start growing, and they swell up into these ball-shaped bodies that reach up to 1 centimeter in diameter, about the size of a small marble. within the stratum corneum. That's the outermost layer of the skin. That's what one looks like. Those little ovals that are surrounding that black spot, those are eggs. The females just start laying eggs right out of the little hole that they have in the skin. And the eggs fall off and, of course, hatch into larvae. The larvae actually do pretty well in sand. So this is the kind of thing you can get if you walk barefoot on certain beaches, I am told. And that's what this looks like in the end. That is somebody's probably second toe. Once the eggs are laid, the females die. The immune system tries to break them down, so you end up with this inflamed, rotting, dead, bloated female flea right under your skin, and it causes this nasty ulcer like this. This can be crippling, and it's also prone to secondary infection. So this is not necessarily lethal, but it's a pretty awful thing to get growing under your toes. You can actually see a little fecal string, that thing that looks like a brown wire over towards the left of center. That's the butt end of one of these fleas. I actually found out about this from somebody who was going on a mission trip to one of the Caribbean countries. I can't remember which. And I actually was able to suggest something to try. One of the things you can sometimes do with insect parasites under the skin is to slap a lot of Vaseline on the infected place. And the idea is that Vaseline will plug up the breathing tubes of the insect and kill it before it's got a chance to get large. I do not know if he's tried that. Not being a medical doctor, I don't absolutely know how well it would work. And I'm certainly not going to get the Nobel Prize for it, but that sounds like something that might work. If any of you ever get Chigo fleas in your toes, do let me know. I'm curious to find out. Ew. That's all I'm going to say about fleas. Diptera is the order that contains true flies. True flies have one pair of wings. The common ancestor of all winged insects had two pairs, and this is what you see today in, you know, everything from dragonflies to butterflies to bees and wasps. In true flies, the first pair of wings has stayed wings. The second pair of wings is reduced and forms a couple of organs called halteres that seem to be organs that sense airspeed and balance. They're used for orienting the fly, but they don't beat and they don't generate lift anymore. So we call a lot of insects flies, but true flies in the Diptera have only one pair of wings. And of course, you know, house flies and fruit flies and all of that. There's a lot of flies that I don't think we even have time to go into that are micropredators, or intermittent parasites, if you like. These, of course, are the ones that bite. And many of these are vectors for other parasites, and we've talked about a lot of these. So the phlebotominae is the subfamily that contains the sandflies, and those transmit leishmania, which we talked about way back. Culicidae is the mosquitoes, and those can transmit filarial nematodes and, of course, malaria. Simulidae, the black flies. It's black flies that transmit those onchocerca nematodes that cause African river blindness. Ceratopagonidae is the biting midges. I'm not sure what they transmit. Tabanidae includes horse flies and deer flies, and those can transmit trypanosoma and filarial nematodes. And then Glossinidae, the tsetse flies, transmit the trypanosoma that causes African sleeping sickness. So a lot of flies are not fully parasitic. They're micropredators, but they're important for another reason as well. They are vectors for quite a lot of important parasites of humans and animals. Oh, and then Muscidae, the house flies, include some micropredators called horn flies and stable flies. There are, however, flies that are more persistent. There's Melophagus ovinus, the sheep ked. This belongs to a family that has secondarily lost its wings. The females have lost their wings. In some species, the males have too. And these are blood-sucking flies that stay much more permanently on vertebrate hosts. And this particular one is a parasite of sheep, Melophagus ovinus. The common name for this is the ked. Now, when I was a kid, keds were not parasites. They were the brand of sneakers that everybody wore. Don't know why the sneakers were named for a sheep parasite, but there you go. Heavy infestations cause scarring, which is potentially bad for the wool. They can make the sheep anemic, and they also bite the hell out of sheep shearers. The people that are harvesting wool from the sheep really do not care for sheep keds. So this is one of the things that sheep farmers try to deal with, often by trying to dip the sheep in an anti-parasite pesticide. Don't know if you've ever heard of sheep dip, but that's why sheep get dipped. It's to kill off things like this. The gent who taught parasitology here before I did, Dr. Gettinger, is also Dr. Larson's husband. And if you're lucky, you may have met him. And he showed me one of these things, and it completely stumped me as to what it was, because it looked like a spider, but it had the wrong number of legs. It turns out this belongs to a unique family of flies that is parasitic only on bats. They are not very well studied. Dr. Gettinger was doing some studies of these down in Brazil, and they have no wings. The head is actually shrunk down to almost nothing, and instead of sticking out from the thorax, it's kind of folded back into a groove. So you can see a couple of antennae at the front of the organism kind of branching off from the head, but that head is that little thing that's basically sitting kind of on top of the thorax. There aren't any eyes. I don't know if there's much of a brain. I'm guessing there isn't. And it doesn't really look like a proper fly at all. And these, again, are parasites of bats, and nobody seems to know very much about them. Go call the Larson household and ask to speak to Dr. Gettinger if you get curious. Okay, slightly gross picture. We've got worse coming up, by the way. A more common situation with flies is for the larvae to be parasitic. And infection with fly larvae is called myiasis. You can get infections with fly larvae from species that are not normally parasitic. That's called pseudomyiasis. This tends to happen only in pretty unfortunate cases, like people with, wounds that have turned gangrenous or something like that. People with rotting wounds in their flesh might have house flies, for example, laying their eggs in the wound and having larvae eating the rotting tissues. House flies don't normally do that. But if it happens, you have pseudomyiasis. I think that's what's happening here. This unfortunate person managed to get fly larvae in the tear ducts. There are some species that can but don't have to have parasitic larvae. That's called facultative myiasis. This person would, if you asked him, would say, "I have myiasis in my eyes, sis," if he was talking to his sister. Get it? I have myiasis in my eyes, sis. Right, sorry. Here's one. This is Lucilia cuprina. This is the copper bottle fly. It's one of the family of blowflies that mostly feeds on carcasses. I've seen them feeding on feces as well. You've probably seen these before at some point. The most common ones are called blue bottle flies and green bottle flies because they've got those metallic bodies that are blue and green. They mostly feed on dead meat. There's a few that will lay their eggs in wounds, and Lucilia cuprina causes a condition in sheep called wool strike. They'll lay their eggs on sheep's skin folds, especially skin folds that are stained with urine and feces. If you've got a very shaggy sheep that's got lots of hair around its anus and urinary outlet, the sheep might end up with this region of its wool that's pretty much permanently matted with urine and feces. It's funny that Australian English actually has a word for a clump of hair matted with feces around a sheep anus. It's called a dag. If an Australian says rattle ya dags, he means get a move on. But what he's referring to is feces matted wool, because Australia. And anyway, good sheep herders will keep those areas trimmed because that's a great place for copper blowflies to lay their eggs. And the larvae will feed on the feces. They'll also feed on the flesh until they drop off and pupate. That's a sheep hoof that's got a remarkably bad case of wool strike. The wool is damaged, the skin gets damaged, the overall sheep is made unhealthy, and the wounds, as always, run a risk of secondary infection. So, right, if you ever, the world is so crazy, there's all sorts of career opportunities you might end up having to take without realizing it. If any of you ever become shepherds, make sure you keep the wool around the anus trimmed and don't let those dags build up, or you could end up with wool strike. There, never let it be said I've never taught you anything useful. Oddly enough, there's a closely related species. This is Lucilia sericata, the green bottle. Those have actually been used to treat human wounds and ulcers because the larvae will feed on dead tissue without disrupting living tissue. And they have secretions in their saliva that actually inhibit bacterial growth. So these have been used to treat infected wounds or ulcers, especially in elderly and or diabetic patients where an ulcer just may not heal properly because of poor circulation. Green bottle fly larvae can actually debride the dead tissue with minimal disruption to the living tissue, and they actually promote healing. So, yeah. I mean, hopefully a wound would never get to that point, but if it does, we can call in the green bottles and cause a case of myiasis. Let me check on time. Okay. Screwworm flies, Cochleomya hominivorax, lay their eggs on wounds. They can't penetrate healthy skin. The larvae burrow and feed on living tissue. This is still around in Central America, But in the US, it was eradicated in 1982 with the release of sterile males. That works because females will only mate one time. So within the US, we don't have Cochleomya hominivorax anymore. In Central America, I'm told it's still there. And then estrids, probably the most horrifying, includes human botflies, Dermatobia hominis. This is a case of a phoretic relationship, and we actually saw a slide of this way back in the early days. Female human botflies lay their eggs on mosquitoes. The mosquitoes will carry the eggs around. It's phoracy again, until the mosquitoes bite, and the larvae immediately hatch out of the egg, drop off the mosquito, and penetrate the skin. I believe they'll go right into the wound that the mosquito made. This is not drawn to scale, but those are the first 3 larval instars, and then the adult on the right. If you look at B, you can see that it's got a swollen part of the body with a lot of spines. Actually, you can see those spines on A and C as well. Those spines point backwards and make it difficult to get botfly larvae out of the skin. So there, you can see those backward pointing spines much more clearly. There's 2 of those instars. So if you get these, you can't simply squeeze them out, like you would a pimple or something like that. It may require surgery to get botfly larvae out from under your skin. They're probably a bigger problem in livestock because species of botfly can attack cows, sheep, goats, horses. I haven't heard of any of them going after dogs and cats, although I wouldn't be surprised if some do. But there's certainly a problem for raisers of livestock. That's a cross-section through the head of a sheep, and the sheep's infected with Estrus ovis that lays its eggs in sheep and goat nostrils in early autumn, and the larvae crawl up the sinuses. They'll feed there until spring, and then crawl out and pupate in soil. And then warble flies lay their eggs on the hairs of cow legs. I have never seen this happen, but adult warble flies, cows are extremely sensitive to the particular vibrations that they make, and they'll freak out if a warble fly flies nearby. They instinctively don't like them because warbles lay eggs on cow legs. The larvae burrow under the skin, and they'll travel through the connective tissue. They'll migrate up to the spinal canal, all the way up to the esophagus, and then back along the spine, molting never mind, they don't molt, but they'll molt a couple of times once they're under the skin. And when they're under the skin, they form these. These are lumps that are called warbles. And they'll poke a hole in the skin so that they can breathe. And they will molt a couple of times and eventually emerge, drop to the ground, and pupate within the soil. And eventually hatch as adults, and round goes the great circle of life. The adults will mate and then lay their eggs on cow hairs. This is really bad for the cow. I think I'm told you can have, in really bad cases, you might have thousands of these things, all of them forming lumps. Aside from being terrible for the cow's health, it's bad if you're in the leather industry because these things leave these things leave holes. And the hide of a cow that's been infected with a lot of warbles, you can't sell because it's going to have little tiny holes in it. Horses get these too. This is the inside of an infected horse's stomach. These don't live under the skin. The adults lay eggs on horse hairs, and the larvae either crawl into the mouth or they get licked into the mouth. They develop in the tissues of the mouth and then crawl down into the stomach. They pupate and are excreted in feces. Mild infections may be asymptomatic. Heavy ones can do pretty serious damage. I think other species in this genus will infect sheep and goats and things like that. So, I don't know. I was trying to come up with a joke about, they can even infect Facebook. You've heard of computer viruses, but Facebook has bots. But I don't really have the time to set that up to make that one actually funny. But yeah, there's a whole bot network. And then my personal favorite is the reindeer botfly. Hypoderma tarandi just lays its eggs on reindeer skin. The larvae grow and pupate under the skin of the reindeer. A badly infected reindeer may have as many as 2,000 of these. And hunters of the Inuit people, the people we used to call Eskimos, although that's not the preferred name now, if they're skinning a reindeer, or as it's called in North America, a caribou, they're the same. If they're skinning one, they will sometimes encounter these hypoderma larvae under the skin. And apparently they taste perfectly pleasant, kind of milky, I'm told. So they'll just pop the larvae right into their mouths as a tasty snack. This is the only case, well, one of the few cases I've been able to find of humans eating an animal that's parasitic on another animal. The only other example I was able to think of is lampreys, which you probably don't eat much of, but in some cultures they're considered a delicacy. There's plenty of organisms that are parasitic on plants that we eat. Mushrooms, for example, not all, but there are edible mushrooms that are plant parasites. But this is the only case I'm aware of people eating an animal endoparasite deliberately. So there. Right. That's what I have got for you today. And I will go ahead and stop recording.